On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
There's some kind of characteristic things that happen when people start to think of something as a moral issue. And one thing that happens is they just become more black and white in their thinking. They don't like question asking, right? It starts to feel heretical. I feel like that is kind of what we see here sometimes. I mean, I think there are some folks who really think of this as a moral crusade.
Hi, this is Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and you're listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. So diversity, equity, and inclusion all sound lovely, right? Good values, what could be nicer? In practice, though, initiatives promoting these values have gotten a lot of pushback in recent years, and there's no one-sentence summary of why. Some of that pushback has come from people who outright oppose meritocracy and are just bigots, basically. Or they prefer a world with hereditary elites. But what makes this a thorny topic is that some of the opposition also comes from people who are in favor of these values in principle, but who see DEI as it's practiced in North America, or rather as it's practiced in Canada now and was until recently in the United States, as damaging to the very goals it purports to benefit. So we've been hearing a lot these days about Jewish professors moving to the U.S., moving from the U.S., well, also moving in both directions, but specifically moving from the U.S. to Canada because of Trump. Yoel Inbar's case is a bit different. Yoel is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. I am happy to have him here with us on the Jewish Angle today because when I saw that the University of California system was getting rid of its mandatory DEI statements for applicants, your name is the one that immediately came to my mind. Please explain why that was.
Hey, Phoebe, thanks for having me. Yeah, so a couple years ago, I was being considered for a job at UCLA, and this would have been a partner hire. So my partner already had an offer there, and it's not infrequent that universities, when they're trying to recruit somebody, will say, well, if they're in a couple and the couple is also an academic, can we find something for the partner? So that's the context. And I went out there, I interviewed, they seemed to like me, it seemed to go well. They told me, we really like your CV, it seems like you'd fit in well here, et cetera, et cetera. And then afterwards, I'm not going to go through the long version of this, but I heard that there was trouble. And the trouble basically was that I have my own podcast in which my co-host and I had talked about some of the pros and cons about requiring these kinds of diversity statements. So
and what's the name of your podcast?
Two Psychologists, Four Beers. Yeah. So we drink and we talk about stuff that's going on in academia and beyond. So for the listeners who might not be familiar with what these are, basically when you're an applicant for a job, you're asked to write a 1 or 2 page statement about what you've done for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or what you would want to do in the future, or about your values. It's kind of vague and it sort of depends on the place you're applying to. And so my co-host and I had, I think like 4 or 5 years ago now, when these were first starting to pop up, we recorded an episode where we talked about some of the pros and cons of these. Certainly it wasn't that we were, condemning this as progressive overreach or anything like that. It wasn't, an angry denunciation of them. We were more talking about, well, what are some of the upsides and downsides? But some of the really DEI enthusiastic folks at UCLA did not like that. There's a couple other things that they also disliked in, the 100+ episodes of the podcast that we've made, but that really seemed to be the main thing that we were questioning, whether DEI statements really were a good idea. And so in the end, they ended up not making me an offer under kind of unusual circumstances. The details are a bit boring, but basically they spiked it before most of the faculty could really have a say about it at all. And it was clear from the documents that we eventually got from them that that really was because of the DEI stuff. Like, that's what the issue was.
I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry this happened to you, because that sucks.
Well, that's also, okay. It's pretty great here. I'm happy to be here,
but it's cold here.
Yes.
And yet at the same time. So I was going to ask, but anything like that is always unpleasant to go through. But are you now like, does this change in administration in the U.S. mean never mind, and now you go there and do that, or
no, this is all over, right? Like, yeah, no, there's not a do-over on this stuff. I was sort of hoping that they might send me an apology eventually, but maybe that's still in the mail.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like that would be the very least. But yeah, so timeline-wise, this is kind of interesting. I was looking to see when this all happened, because I know I mentioned it in one of my columns at the CJN, and this was all 2023 but it was before October 7th.
Yeah.
Right. So it seems like a lot of these issues would come to change a lot abruptly. And I do want to talk about these bigger sort of angles on this, but also what is it specifically that you objected to about these statements? Was it mainly that them being mandatory, or was it something else more so?
Yeah, there were a few things that we thought might be problematic about them. The first is that it could be compelled speech. So it could be that these statements ask you to support a particular ideology or worldview, right? They don't necessarily have to be, but they might be in practice used in that way. We're going to filter out everybody who doesn't say the right things about DEI from like an ideological standpoint, rather than you might think of them as being about, how do you teach diverse populations, et cetera. So there's like different ways to think about it, but one way might be this ideological angle. Another issue is they might just be cheap talk, especially if you're recruiting graduate students who just haven't had a lot of opportunity to teach or mentor, for example. Then you're just asking people to say what they would do, and how informative is that really? And then the third concern might be for people who come from outside of the North American political context, that they might just not understand what's being asked, right? So if you're coming from a school internationally, you just don't have necessarily that same background in North American kind of like ideology around diversity, and you might really be at a disadvantage there. So you might ironically end up helping the people who are coming from the most privileged backgrounds, right? So Harvard literally has people who will help you craft a diversity statement, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's an aspect of this I find super interesting, just because like I wrote about this with like privilege checking and all this stuff in the book I wrote in 2017, The Perils of Privilege. I wrote about college admissions essays, and how the very act of writing a college admissions essay you're supposed to show your privilege awareness, but who can do that most effectively is somebody whose parents have paid for a tutor, who knows that that's relevant, so is it similar?
Yeah, exactly. There's all of this cultural knowledge that might seem obvious to people who are in that culture, but that is not obvious to people who are not in the culture. And so it might really be erecting barriers to people who don't have the same cultural background as most of us in academia.
So you, to be clear, just for listeners, it's not that you oppose diversity or, fairness or so forth, and think that there should be like some sort of anointed elites at universities. Rather, it's that you think this DEI stuff, as it was being practiced, was not furthering the goals it was saying it would. Is that more accurate?
I mean, I would even say, the last hiring committee that I was on, we did ask for diversity statements, and I found them to be reasonably useful, right? So I think you can make a case that sometimes they are helpful. But I think the worry is that they are abused in a way that makes them not helpful. And that more broadly, if we care about diversity, which I do, then we want to be asking, do these things help or not? We can't be uncritical about an intervention because it's claimed to help us with some goal that we like. We have to be able to say, well, does it actually? Or should we be doing something else? Or maybe even, is this counterproductive?
Right. I mean, it seems like there are a couple, there's so many things, so many angles on this. I mean, one is this issue of sort of equality of outcome, or the identical outcome that we were reading, both of us, this Globe and Mail Business Supplement article about this that was saying that if you have your workplace structured right, you will just sort of automatically get people from all backgrounds in equal measure. And I was just thinking about what is the likelihood that the Canadian Jewish News would have that outcome. And, it just seems like a lot of different jobs would potentially, it's tricky. But the other thing is just this that I wanted to talk about, though. I mean, please say if you have anything on that also. But like just this question of which groups count seems to have been contentious kind of from the get-go, and then suddenly became very much so after October 7th.
Certainly, in the DEI discourse that I was aware of pre-October 7th, like Jews didn't come up. Now, to be fair, in academia, we're kind of overrepresented, right? So you don't really have to worry about we don't have enough Jews and we need more Jews and so on. But it just like wasn't even on the radar, right? So yeah, it's when you get into this,
but the inclusion though aspect,
right. And honestly, that wasn't on the radar either. And I think we'll get to how that was an issue post October 7th, right? But yeah, I mean, the way in which I dealt with it was pretty specifically around diversity of faculty and their. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that we're going to precisely match like the population of Canada or the GTA or whatever it is. But still, when you have undergraduates who are at my campus, UT Scarborough, they're majority minority, and like literally every faculty member is white, it's a little weird. So that's something that we definitely had in mind and thought about. And then also, how are you going to teach and mentor people who come from all sorts of different backgrounds, right? So that like kind of broadly is about diversity. Well, okay. And then the last thing I should say is we care about like the campus climate and the climate of the department and so on. And so that kind of goes under that as well. So those are all things that I think are like completely reasonable and like within our job description and that we should be caring about. And that, any objections that I had were, it seems like this thing that you're trying to do isn't really helpful.
So would you say that your research as a psychology professor in any way informs how you look at this issue? Because I see that you study the moral language among elites is one of the things. So it seems like it would, but it's not my area.
Yeah, no, I mean, I study kind of broadly morality and moral thinking. And I think there's some kind of characteristic things that happen when people start to think of something as a moral issue. And one thing that happens is they just become more black and white in their thinking. They don't like question asking, right? It starts to feel heretical. Like what you're supposed to do is agree rather than asking inconvenient questions. And when people encounter those sorts of people who are asking those questions, they get upset, right? They don't like them. They get emotionally upset with them, and they want to kick them out. And so kick them out of the tribe, kick them out of the coalition, whatever. And so I feel like that is kind of what we see here sometimes. I mean, I think most people are reasonable about this, but I think there are some folks who really think of this as a moral crusade. And you see all of those kind of characteristics of moral thinking and how they respond to threats.
You're so calm and reasoned, which I guess explains why you have not turned this into your whole personality, because you have a backstory where you could have done that. Like, it's partly that I really didn't want that, and I kind of really consciously like took a step back and I was like, I'm going to be thoughtful about how I talk about this publicly. I'm going to decline the invitations to go on the right-wing podcasts or get interviewed for right-wing media, because it's just like not, I mean, nothing against them per se. I just like, that's not how I want to spend my life. I like what I do. I don't particularly enjoy being a political figure, and I just don't want to do that with my time. That seems fair. So all of this stuff with Jews became quite different after October 7th. The whole sort of inclusion aspect, like it struck me that it just seemed like a lot of Jews were on on campuses in Canada and the United States had been kind of promised something DEI-like to happen for them, and then it didn't. You know what I mean? Does this ring a bell at all, or no?
So I don't know. I can't say what people felt that they had been promised. As a Jewish person pre-October 7th, I felt that this DEI, the whole thinking just wasn't about Jewish people at all. Like, it wasn't mentioned. It didn't come up. So I don't know. I mean, I guess like broadly, you would think if you're a member of a religious minority and you're going to university, you expect that the DEI people are going to care about you feeling included. That seems fair.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
I mean, what I just was reading also this New York Times article about the president of Harvard, who has been standing up to Trump on this, that maybe we will now leap ahead in time a little bit. But it seems, but the whole gist of this article is that the president of Harvard also agrees with Trump that Harvard has an anti-Semitism problem and an ideological diversity problem and all of this, but just doesn't think that the president of the United States gets to sort of decide what universities do. So, like, what do you make of the way this crackdown from the Trump administration on DEI is being done in the name of fighting anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I don't give the Trump administration a lot of credit for sincerely caring about anti-Semitism. I think this is a way for them to whack their ideological adversaries, people they don't like, and they've had an axe to grind against higher ed for quite a while. And, I mean, fair enough. So, like, leaving aside the specific things that the Trump administration, that they're trying to do, which I think many of them ultimately won't survive legal scrutiny, the idea that if you as an institution align yourself in a very partisan way and at the same time take a lot of government money, that is going to cause a conflict once the people who disagree with you come into power, which is going to happen eventually. And I think it's complicated on the part of universities because I think university administrations at the higher levels, they're very aware of this. And they are really making efforts to reach out to people on the right. But the faculty, on average, are very left-wing. And so this is just a really difficult thing for universities to manage. Like, culturally, they just are left-wing institutions. At the same time, in the US and Canada, they're really dependent on the government in all sorts of ways. Even private institutions, so we've seen, like, basically can't function without government support. And they're sort of in a box there. So that's tough. The way the Trump administration has gone about this, I think, is very bad. And I think lots of kind of heterodox critics of university cultures have said the same thing. All of my critiques, apply still, but the way that the Trump administration is doing this is bad. When it comes to campus anti-Semitism, maybe we can go a little deeper there about like the role that DEI has played. I think at the very least, it's fair to say that these institutions that I think promised that if you're a religious minority, we are going to care that you feel included and that you belong here, that really hasn't been felt by many Jewish students.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems to be sort of down to like the details of, specific DEI sessions and so forth. It seems like that has been a big issue. I want to talk about all of this, but the speech issues from Trump seem to me and to many others to exceed the ones like from that era preceding it. It seems like the crackdown on speech coming from the Trump administration is of a scale different from the compelled speech of a DEI statement. Do you think that's accurate, or am I just a knee-jerk liberal in an echo chamber?
I mean, I think that the two just almost can't be compared in terms of their consequences. So I think that the DEI statements often were used as sort of an ideological filter, and I think that's bad for scientific research. It's unfair to some of the individuals who get filtered out. But what the Trump administration is doing is deporting people for writing op-eds or defunding a bunch of cancer research, just in the scale of the impact. I just can't compare those two even.
Right. So, okay. So it sounds like we're on the same page on this. Yeah, so it's going to be one of those a lot of agreeing podcasts. Sorry about that for those who wanted more mudslinging. But so this is something that I've been, I don't even know if struggling with is the right word, because I feel like I'm actually kind of clear on it. But you get a lot of, especially maybe this is a Blue Sky phenomenon, the platform Blue Sky, the nicer alternative to Twitter or not, depending. But a lot of what I've been seeing is this kind of, see, the real threat is from the right. If you were ever speaking out against something like a mandatory DEI statement, this is on you. If you ever express any kind of heterodox thought, this is on you. If you ever complained about anti-Semitism, this is on you. I see it a bit differently. I see it more as that the progressive illiberalism kind of paved the way for some of this. And it makes it so that there is something real that the Trump administration can kind of latch onto and then do all sorts of stuff that isn't actually addressing it. How do you see it?
Yeah, sorry, man. I would love to disagree with you.
Please do.
Yeah, I can't on this. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, I think that this kind of Blue Sky criticism is stupid. This is why I don't go on Blue Sky. It's what a disaster of okay. So I will say the one thing that's good about academic Blue Sky is that people talk about their new papers, and sometimes you're like, oh, I'd like to read that paper. But anything political is just such a groupthink machine. It's just ridiculous. And so people say this dumb shit, and nobody contradicts them. This is stupid, okay? The reason that Trump is going after this stuff is in part because it actually is unpopular. The way to not get attacked by demagogues is to make yourself harder to demagogue. And what Trump is going after is stuff that many people don't like, and they don't like it because there is some bad stuff that happened there. Now, in terms of scale, obviously, I think what Trump is doing is worse. But that doesn't mean that you don't have responsibility, you faculty member or administrator or whatever, for making it easy. And I think that leaving aside whatever political fight we're having right now in the US, which is, as momentous as it seems, is only one moment in time. What we ought to be worrying about is why, as institutions, have we dramatically lost the trust of the public, right? So if you look at people's trust in higher ed as an institution, it's just this precipitous decline over the last 10, 15 years, and not just among the right, among independents and among people on the left as well. So there is something real happening there, and we really should worry about it, and we should try and fix it. And that is irrespective of whatever thing that Trump has to be, whatever he's trying to do in the moment. I think the Harvard approach is exactly right? They're pushing back on the stuff that is illegal and overreach. And at the same time, they're acknowledging that there are issues that need to be addressed.
I mean, it does seem like what happened after October 7th was that there was it suddenly became clear that there wasn't just, in all cases, the oppressed and the oppressor, and it was just everybody was going to agree on who's who. But instead of that just sort of leading to academia itself kind of naturally backing away from certain things, we got something else.
I think this underscores maybe a more fundamental problem with the way that we have been doing DEI. So one of the promises kind of broadly was supposed to be, we're going to understand each other better. When we have conflicts with each other, we're going to be able to resolve those better. And in practice, that's never what this was designed to do. The way that DEI on college campuses was designed to work was to say, I'm a member of some minority group, and I'm experiencing this problem, and I want that addressed. And what that leaves out is sometimes solving my problem makes some other minority group worse off, right? So when you have these like real conflicts of values or preferences or needs between different groups, the DEI framework is just not set up right now to resolve those. And so on campus, when you post October 7th, I would characterize it as like a conflict of values, kind of broadly between people who were pro-Palestinian, very upset about the war and wanted to protest, and Jewish students who felt, often with reason, that those protests made them unsafe. How do you arbitrate that, right? I think there are legitimate claims on both sides, and the DEI apparatus just was not set up to say, well, you both have a point, and now we're going to figure out some sort of way to reconcile those competing values or claims.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So something that I find really sort of, I don't know, mind-boggling or something like, I don't even know what the word is, discombobulating about talking about any of these topics is that your brain has to be kind of in two places at once. You being a psychology professor, maybe you understand about this better than I do, but like in the US, talking about DEI feels like you're talking the past tense. But in Canada, it seems to be very much present to the point that there was just a National Post article about Michael Plaxton, a University of Saskatchewan law professor who described to a National Post reporter the mandatory DEI trainings there where he has to where they're checking their privilege like it's 2014 in Saskatchewan. And so you seem particularly well-placed at explaining what's up with, where is Canada at in all of this, specifically Canadian academia, because it seems like business may be a different story.
Yeah. So I think I can speak like most to what I've seen here at U of T, and then maybe a little bit to other institutions. It is definitely now feels like a different world from the US. The US has changed very quickly. I think in Canada, hopefully what we're going to do is be a little slower and more thoughtful about what changes we want to make. I know that a lot of the complaints or reservations from people who like generally think of themselves as like center left, those are the same across Canadian versus US institutions. And the difference is Trump, obviously. But my hope is that we are going to be able to moderate a bit, to think about what works well and what doesn't, maybe to do fewer of these dumb trainings, as was described in this National Post article. I think many, even like really fervently pro-DI people in many ways, are willing to say, yeah, these trainings don't really work. This is
actually just one thing I wanted to kind of follow up on that regard. Like if you're in a meeting now, not you particularly, but like if somebody in Canada is in a meeting now, do you think that they will feel emboldened? I don't even know if this is generalizable, but that they'd feel emboldened by the fact that in the US, this has just been gotten rid of sort of outright, that they'd feel emboldened to make whichever critiques or give whichever sort of mild pushback? Or conversely, do you think it's like if you do some pushback now, it's like, oh, you're Trumpy?
Yeah.
Go to America then if you don't want this, you know?
Right. I mean, I think that's a great question and remains to be seen. It might be that the vibe shift now is that we are in opposition to everything that America is doing. And so we might like counter polarize. Before that, like before the trade war, my feeling was this vibe shift was going to come here as well. And we are in many ways still like really culturally downstream of the US here in Canada. And so my expectation was that we were going to go in the same direction, although not as, quickly or extremely, always kind of more moderately. But, we're living in a different world now. So remains to be seen. I think for us, just the stuff that I've seen is a little more like pushback and questioning, and the feeling that we're like past the peak of just really extreme and silly stuff. But maybe that's also just rose-colored glasses. I don't know.
I mean, I just for Canadian Jews, I think it's just I think there probably is some interest in at least a bit of reform of this type of thing, perhaps more so than for other populations. I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, when I talk to colleagues about this, the Jewish colleagues are usually, they're, let's say, more sensitive to how some of this stuff is played out past, post October 7th.
Right. I mean, like, I guess all of this is hard to generalize. And I think there are also a lot of Jews who are among the people very enthusiastic about DEI, which makes it hard to measure. But, this is so complicated. But are you hopeful for the future of academia? Will there still be academia in 10 years?
I am confident that there will still be academia in 10 years, Phoebe.
In Canada and in the United States, or just in Canada?
I'm more confident about Canada. No, I mean, I'm kidding. Like, these storms will pass. I think academia does need some serious changes in what's our relationship to the broader culture, but I think that we've changed and adapted before, and we can do that again.
Yoel Inbar, thank you so much for coming on The Jewish Angle. Where can people find you?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. They can look at my website if for some reason they want to read my scientific papers. More likely, my podcast might be of interest to people. 4beers.com. You can find all of our episodes there.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Thank you for listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. This has been Phoebe Maltz Bovy, opinion editor of the CJN and a contributing editor of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's print magazine. The show is produced and edited by Michael Fraiman. Mark Weisblatt is the editorial director of the CJN. Our music is by Frank Fraiman. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Jewish Angle wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.